Imagine a console from the year 2000, pulling off graphics and gameplay that still look unbelievable today. No updates. No shaders, just raw coding magic. The PS2 didn't just break rules, it completely rewrote them. And the most insane part? Some of these games looked better than early PS3 titles. This isn't nostalgia, it's proof that developers back then were absolute wizards. The PS2 had no GPU like modern consoles. It didn't even support basic things like dynamic lighting or anti-aliasing, and yet, somehow, developers made it do the impossible. Open worlds, destructible environments, even smooth reflections. This video is your portal into the most ridiculous, brain-melting PS2 games that make you say, how did they pull this off? Let's kick things off with a bang literally. Black by Criterion Games wasn't just a shooter. It was a Hollywood action movie running on a toaster. Explosions felt weighty, glass shattered realistically, and guns had a sense of power that most PS3 shooters couldn't even match. This game made the PS2 sweat and still ran smooth. Here's the kicker. Black had dynamic-looking lighting, but surprise, it wasn't real. Developers faked it by hand-placing shadows and using bright textures to simulate illumination. They even tricked your brain with audio design to make explosions feel more intense. All this on a console with 32 megabytes of RAM. Now let's talk about a straight-up masterpiece, Shadow of the Colossus. This game gave you 16 giant boss fights in a massive open world, running on hardware that wasn't even designed for open-world games, and somehow it worked. There were no loading screens, just you, your horse, and monsters the size of buildings. What makes Shadow of the Colossus even crazier? The sense of scale. Climbing up moving colossi in real time with wind physics, dynamic camera angles, and weighty animations, it all felt cinematic. And this was before games like Assassin's Creed even existed. To fake lighting, the devs at Team Eco used skyboxes and ambient occlusion tricks baked into the textures. That's right, they painted light into the game, no real-time calculations. Just genius-level art direction mixed with code hacks. Now let's go deeper literally, into the gritty, horror-filled world of Silent Hill 3. This game somehow made fog, shadows, and reflections scarier than most PS4 horror titles. And guess what? It didn't even have modern lighting tools. The PS2 couldn't render soft shadows. So how did Silent Hill 3 pull off realistic ones? The devs faked it with semi-transparent textures and layered effects. It's like they created fear using paint and smoke. That's next-level horror design. Now here's a game that blew everyone's mind, God of War II, massive boss fights, giant set pieces, hundreds of enemies, and buttery smooth gameplay on the PS2, and somehow, it never slowed down, even during chaos. God of War II pulled off the illusion of real-time cinematic battles with clever camera locking, static backgrounds, and animated 2D textures pretending to be 3D. That trickery made everything feel epic without killing performance. Let's talk Gran Turismo 4, a racing sim so detailed, people thought it was an early PS3 title. Reflections on cars, real-time weather effects, high-race textures, all running on a console that can barely run Angry Birds today. Here's the cheat code. Gran Turismo 4 used pre-rendered lighting baked into every car model. The reflections? Fake, but perfectly positioned. And since cars don't deform, the illusion held up insanely well. Remember Metal Gear Solid 3? That game was packed with mechanics. Camouflage systems, dynamic enemy AI, survival elements like stamina and healing, and it ran without crashing. That's a miracle on PS2. What's more insane? Snake's face actually changed when he was cold, hungry, or injured. They did this with layered textures that swapped dynamically. It looked high-tech, but it was just clever coding and time sprite changes. Let's take a weird turn into Okami, a game that looked like a Japanese painting come to life. Stylized brush strokes, smooth animation, and one of the most beautiful games ever. All in a 4.8 OP console. Okami faked high resolution by using thick black outlines and bright color palettes. It was a trick and illusion that hid the PS2's limitations, and it worked. Most people didn't even notice it wasn't HD. Now enter Killzone. Hyped as the Halo killer, it had insane lighting, cinematic moments, and chaotic battles. While it didn't kill Halo, it absolutely murdered expectations of what the PS2 could do. Killzone simulated real-time lighting by using flickering spotlights, animated textures, and pre-baked shadows. It felt alive, dark, atmospheric, and way too advanced for 2004. And then there's Final Fantasy XII, a full-blown MMORPG-style world with voice acting. Giant cities, a party system, and seamless combat. It felt like Square Enix summoned sorcery to make it happen. The game ran smoothly because of clever asset streaming and loading zones disguised as wide corridors. What felt like freedom was actually a perfectly hidden maze of technical boundaries. and we never noticed. Want your brain broken? Manhunt by Rockstar used real-time camera filters to simulate CCTV effects. It added to the horror and felt gritty, raw, and disturbing. That wasn't post-processing, it was pure dev trickery. Since PS2 couldn't apply true video filters, they layered grainy textures and flicker animations to create that surveillance vibe. Low-tech but high impact. That's creative violence at its finest. Another wild one, Jak and Daxter 2. A fully open city, voice acting, vehicles, weapons, and nitrogen monoxide loading screens. That's literally Grand Theft Auto in cartoon form, on a console with less power than your phone. The secret? They broke the city into chunks and streamed data from the disc in real time. If your disc had scratches, tough luck, the magic relied on seamless reads. That's how close it ran to the edge. And speaking of GTA, San Andreas was a monster. 3 full cities, countryside, real-time NPCs, dynamic weather, even gyms and RPG stats. And it all fit into 4.7 gigabytes. That's not a game, it's a tech flex. To keep it running, Rockstar reused assets, built in aggressive LDIS systems, and used fog as a performance tool. That's why the cities looked hazy, it wasn't style. It was survival. Want more madness? Resident Evil 4 ran better on PS2 than it should have. Capcom squeezed a GameCube game into the PS2 and made it smoother than anyone thought possible, even adding bonus content. How? They rewrote huge chunks of the engine, simplified lighting, and optimized every model. The result? A survival horror masterpiece that defined a generation and proved the PS2 could still fight. Let's talk about a sleeper hit that proved the PS2 had PC-level potential Timeslippers. Future Perfect. This game didn't just offer fast-paced shooting and wacky characters. It had something that was basically unheard of back then, a full-blown map editor. People were creating their own levels, tweaking spawn points, and sharing experiences long before user-generated content was even a trend, and it all ran like butter. How did Timeslippers pull this off? The devs kept the geometry modular, everything was like building blocks. Combine that with low overhead scripting and smart asset reuse, and you had a custom map system that never overwhelmed the PS2. It was a console shooter that played like a PC arena game, quick respawns, tight controls, and multiplayer madness. We're talking on parties on the freaking PS2. Now slide into the smooth, acrobatic chaos of Prince of Persia, The Two Thrones. This game was elegant. Running across walls, flipping through traps, slicing enemies mid-air, it was parkour before Assassin's Creed even had a logo. The animation blending alone was years ahead of its time, making movement look fluid and reactive instead of robotic. Ubisoft Montreal pulled this off by using skeletal animation blending, a fancy way of saying animations were stitched together in real time. That let Prince go from running to jumping to stabbing without ever looking stiff. The PS2 couldn't even process motion blur properly, so they faked it using afterimages and timed effects. You thought you saw real effects, but it was all an illusion. Next, we need to talk about The Warriors by Rockstar. This game didn't get enough love, but technically it was a beast. Fully animated gang fights, crowd brawls, cutscenes with voice acting, destructible environments, co-op gameplay, and a full city to explore, all on PS2. That's way too much game for the hardware. Rockstar crammed it all in using procedural animations and shared actor rigs. This let enemies react dynamically without eating up memory. Damage was handled via layered textures, so you'd see blood and bruises appear based on your hits. Every punch felt like it had weight because it actually changed how the models looked mid-fight. How about Burnout III Takedown? High-speed crashes, cinematic camera cuts, dynamic reflections, and debris flying everywhere. It made Need for Speed look like a casual Sunday drive. And somehow, the PS2 kept up without ever dropping below 30 FPS. Burnout III's devs used clever load systems and physics approximations. Crashes looked real, but they weren't actually simulating metal bending in real time. It was all pre-scripted animations mixed with quick camera work and particle effects, and we bought it because it felt insane. Then there's Ratchet & Clank, Up Your Arsenal. This game didn't just give you weapons, it gave you ridiculous weapons. Guns that morphed enemies, turned them into sheep, or sucked them into black holes. And every single one had its own particles, effects, and audio. Insomniac used procedural effect systems, meaning explosions, sparks, and lasers weren't hand-animated. They were calculated by the game engine in real time using modular parts. That's how they could have dozens of enemies and weapons on screen without crashing the system. Genius optimization. Let's not sleep on Tekken 5. The PS2 wasn't built for high-fidelity fighters. And yet, this game had smooth combos, dynamic backgrounds, character models with facial expressions, and multi-stage arenas. It looked like an early PS3 launch title, but nope, PS2, baby. Namco cheated physics by scripting collision hitboxes independently from the actual animations. So even if a punch looked late, it still landed. This made the gameplay buttery smooth while freeing up CPU to focus on rendering and effects. A perfect balance between precision and performance. Devil May Cry 3 was pure chaos. Frame-perfect combos, flashy swordplay, a stylish rating system, and difficulty that slapped you in the face. But under the hood, it was one of the most technically optimized PS2 games ever made. Capcom used animation canceling to chain moves at lightning speed, and camera locking to simplify rendering. Enemies were grouped into zones off-screen so they didn't drain performance until you saw them. It was like a stage play, you only saw what you needed to, and it looked amazing every time. Now buckle up for Soulcalibur III. This fighter featured full-body customization, a full-blown strategy campaign, and console-exclusive characters. It had more content than most games today, and it was on a DVD. The developers used mirrored assets, texture swapping, and skeleton sharing to keep file sizes small. That meant hundreds of combinations with barely any RAM impact. Character creation felt deep, but the game was just rotating costumes on a handful of base models. Pure design brilliance. Ever play Bully? It was like GTA High School Edition. Classes, a full day-night cycle, a living open world, seasonal changes, and fully voiced characters. Rockstar made you live in that world, and they made it all fit on the PS2. To make this work, Rockstar reused interiors, synced character AI routines to the clock system, and layered audio files dynamically. So even though the town felt huge, it was actually compact and brilliantly looped. It fooled your brain into thinking the game was way bigger than it was. Then there's Medal of Honor, Frontline. The D-Day landing level alone looked like something straight out of Saving Private Ryan. Explosions, water physics, enemy AI, it was cinematic before cinematic gameplay was a thing. The water effects were just animated textures with color overlays. Explosions were layered sprites, and gun recoil was all camera shake. But it worked. Because the devs made the sound design and visuals sync perfectly, creating the illusion of realism. Tony Hawk's Underground gave us open-world skating, full character customization, a full campaign mode, and custom tricks. It was way more than just a skating game. It was a vibe. They kept it smooth by hiding load zones in tunnels and stairs, using low-poly models at a distance, and looping background audio to fake ambient city life. The result? A PS2 game that felt like you were living inside a skate video. Let's not forget Kingdom Hearts 2. Disney worlds, Final Fantasy characters, massive enemies, magic spells flying everywhere, and seamless transitions from cutscenes to combat. It was one of the most ambitious games on PS2. Square Enix used real-time cutscenes with locked camera angles to reduce rendering load. They also limited background movement in combat zones, focusing on flashy effects and tight mechanics. And it worked. It felt like a Disney anime battle every single time. Here's a wild one. Socom 2. Tactical shooters on console were rare, but Socom nailed it. Real squad commands, dynamic weather, stealth, and even online play with voice chat on PS2. That was sci-fi back then. The devs split the AI into layers, squad AI, enemy AI, and event triggers were all semi-independent. That way, they didn't overload the CPU. Weather effects were just overlay filters with randomized fog patterns. But man, did it feel immersive. Let's wrap this madness with Persona 4. AJRPG with voice acting. Stylized menus, deep turn-based combat, and a calendar system that changed the world around you. That's 3 games worth of content on one disc. Atlus used static backgrounds, stylized effects, and smart audio looping to deliver variety without eating memory. And the UI? It wasn't just pretty, it was light on performance too. You felt like you were in an anime, but it ran on 20-year-old hardware. And that's the magic of the PlayStation 2. A console with just 32 megabytes of RAM. No hard drive and no fancy SSDs, yet it gave us some of the most iconic, insane, and unforgettable games ever made. Developers weren't just making games. They were pulling off miracles. Every frame was a trick. Every effect was a lie that looked way too good to be true. And honestly, we didn't care. We were too busy having the time of our lives. So if you grew up with the PS2, or even if you're just discovering these masterpieces now, you're part of gaming history. Drop a comment with your favorite PS2 moment. Smash that like button if you had at least one of these games, and if you want more deep dives into how old school consoles did the impossible, subscribe now, because we're just getting started. The PS2 didn't just run games, it broke the rules and somehow got away with it.